Hi, Kevin Joyce back again. This is part 3 of the masterclass. Part 1 and part 2 we covered boilers and steam and hot direct process heat, kilns and furnaces and things. That was all technical. This one's a little bit less technical. It's more about the commercial aspects of buying energy. We won't be going into complexity about tariffs and things, but we'll give you a bit of a sense of how you can prepare to get energy at the most competitive price, gas at the most competitive price. And we'll look at some of the alternatives to gas if it all becomes too hard and you want to look at an alternative to gas in your future. So, okay, well, let's look at gas in Victoria. And we're talking about what's called a D customer, or a customer that uses more than 10,000 gigajoules of gas per year, typically. These customers have quite low transport costs. In other words, the delivery cost to the customer is fairly small, but the energy cost obviously is a major component. With electricity, the network charges or the delivery and transmission charges can be half the bill typically, or around about that. For gas, it's quite a much lower percentage. So if you look at a typical pie for a D-type customer, 91% of the energy costs is the energy retail or the energy consumption charge. The transmission charge is 5. The regulatory charges, these are the renewable charges and some of the other charges and the market charges, are all very small percentages of the pie. So you can look at your own bill, because the second page of the bill breaks up the costs from energy, transmission, distribution, regulatory charges. So it's worth doing this exercise yourself. Take 12 months worth of bills, look at the second page, and look at what percentage is the energy charge as a total part of the bill. Why I'm showing this slide is basically to show the importance of trying to drive down the energy or retail component as against spending a lot of time in trying to reduce demand and trying to do other things for network and distribution elements. For electricity, it's a different animal. It's certainly worth looking at demand control and power factor correction and all of those things. With gas, you can still do it, but the prize isn't as much compared to trying to just reduce the energy or the retail component. Okay, what about this gas? People talk gigajoules, megajoules, cubic meters. It's all very confusing to me. At the end of the day, you're probably interested in dollars, and you'll be looking at dollars at the bottom of your bill. So to come up with a benchmark so you can compare what you're doing against others, what reasonable prices are, you need to know what some of these terms are. But obviously, the whole aim of this exercise is that you're trying to reduce your bottom line. So your gas will be measured in uncorrected cubic meters of gas. So if you walk down to your gas meter, it'll have cubic meters. So it's a volume of gas passed. That is at atmospheric pressure. So if you're a large customer, say you're supplied at 70 kPa, that gas is compressed, so they have to multiply by what's called a pressure correction factor. So they take the cubic meters and multiply that by a factor. They then apply a heating value. So the gas is megajoules of gas per cubic metre, or corrected cubic metre. So you've got cubic metres of gas multiplied by megajoules per cubic metre to give you megajoules of gas. And that's what you build on. The gas companies measure the heating value every half hour at all the various zones and take an average of that over the month. So you're applying an average heating value over the month to come up with the figure that they apply on your bill. It doesn't vary a lot. Typically the gas in Victoria might range from 38.4 to 38.9 megajoules of gas per cubic metre volume. The megajoules per day, if you're a large customer, is the gas measured over a day. So if you've got a meter with a logger on it, it measures how many megajoules of gas you consume over the full day. And it also measures how many megajoules of gas you consume in any 1 hour. So those things are recorded and sent via radio signal to the gas market. So you can get access to that yourselves, or you can get access via the retailer to show you how you're using your gas. You know how much gas you use in the month because they bill you, but you need to know what day you use the gas on and what hour you use the gas on. Most retailers will charge you for the amount of gas you use in your contract, gigajoules of gas or megajoules of gas, and also how much your peak day is. How much gas you're going to use in any one day, your peak day, dictates the price. So it's important to manage that peak day for the retail component of the price that you'll be offered. I'll talk about these things in a bit more detail. So your gas contracts come up, and now you need to talk to one of the retailers to say, I want some more gas. A few things you need to be careful of when you're actually negotiating. You may do that yourself, or you may use a consultant or an aggregator or whatever, but whichever way you do that, some of the things that are important is what they call take or pay. What take or pay means is that they set that at, say, 80% of your annual quantity that you said that you'd use. So say you're going to use 100,000 gigajoules of gas, you have to take 80% of that or pay for that. So that's the minimum amount that they will charge you over a year. So say your business, you think it's going, you're going to double production, so you've forecasted you're going to use 200,000 gigajoules. But things went bad, you lost a big order, you're down at 100,000. Your take or pay is 160,000. So you have to pay for 160,000 even though you've only used 100,000. So what I'm saying there, and the retailers are very strong because they buy their gas from their producers with these take or pays. Be very careful not to overestimate how much gas you're going to use. Don't be too bullish to say, I'm going to double production, I'm going to use all this gas, because you can get caught, and it really gets up people's craw where they're paying for something that they're not using. So just ask what the take or pay is, consider what amount that you want to order. The rate at CPI is another important one. Most gas companies will price for current day. So say you're signing a 3-year contract with a customer. They will say the gas is $12 a gigajoule, right? And say we're in November now and we're contracting for January. And we say, okay, $12. I've got a price from the other bloke and one from the third. That's the best price. But remember, or be warned that it is CPI adjusted. So from day one, the adjustment occurs in January of every year. You've contracted in $2018 at $12. So you get a present on day one. You get $12 plus CPI, because CPI kicks in January. So you told the financial people that you signed at $12. No, sorry guys, that was in $2018. January 1, it's $12 plus CPI. So just look at the line. What year is this gas contracted in? Is it in today's dollars or is it in next year's dollars? A lot of people don't read this small print and get a bit embarrassed when they find that, hey, what's this? I'm signed at this price, but that was last year's price. Anyway, most of the retailers do it this way. So as long as you know and you can factor that in, that's fine. The term, well, terms, do you go 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year? It's really a matter of what you think gas prices are going to do over that time. And to be honest, at the moment, there's so much uncertainty with gas. You'll all have heard about that. It's very hard to take a call on 4-year pricing because, if you lock in at very high prices for 4 years and the market does come off, well, then you're stuck with higher prices. Alternatively, are we at the height now? We might lock in, and then, if you lock in 1 year, you might find that the prices go ballistic in 2 or 3 years. So there's a lot of angst at the moment on what term you should go for. Most people, because of where the prices are at the moment, are tending to go short, hoping that things will change in the right direction. I don't know. Overruns is another thing that you've got to be careful of. I mentioned the MDQ before, the maximum gas that you say that you'd use in a day. So you contract for that as well as the total usage. It's not so bad, but if you overrun what you said you'd use, you're exposed to the market for the gas that you've exceeded. So what that means is that if you've got the gas market is very high on that day, and you said you'd only use 400 gigajoules a day and you're using 500 for some reason, for that 100 gigajoules, that's fully exposed to the market. So, if a price is crazy in the market, you pay at a very high level. If it's low, you pay your market value, you pay your contracted price. So it's all one way. You'll either pay your contracted price plus an administration fee for exceeding what you said you'd use, or you'd pay full exposure to the market if it's a high day, whichever is the higher number. So you've just got to be careful setting that MDQ at the right level. If, however, you set it too low in an attempt to get a lower price, because they factor that into the price that they give to you, then you can get stuck with a whole lot of overrun days, which no one wants. There's too much risk associated with that. So it's a matter of balancing your load factor, your usage and your MDQ to minimise costs and minimise the amount of overruns. Aggregation is something that's been accepted by most retailers now, where you've got multiple sites. You can aggregate those sites and you can aggregate your take or pay, your maximum demands and all of those things, basically to reduce the risks. So say, for example, on the take or pay, if one of your plants is going much better, using more gas than you said you'd use, and the other one's using less, you add the two together and you're within the take or pay. So it's a good risk mitigation strategy if you're not doing that already. I mentioned that the transmission component's quite small in the delivered price. You saw that pie chart at the start. It's based on the 10 peak maximum days of the system. So you look at the system and you look at the 10 days in the middle of winter where it's using all the gas. They look at how much gas you're using on those 10 days, and that's the basis of your transmission charge. Some people try to manipulate to say, look, I'll try and reduce my gas on those 10 days to try and reduce my overall transmission charge. But it's virtually impossible to do because you don't know when the system's 10 days are, and then it's very hard to organise your production to coincide with those 10 days. So for the amount of cost that is involved in the total bill, it's probably not worth the while. Focus on trying to save a bit of energy. Maximum distribution charge is maximum hourly usage. The maximum gas you use in any 1 hour is the basis for the distribution charge. Again, given the amount of dollars in the overall bill, you can try and control the peak hour. You can do all these things, but the amount of savings are quite small. Other charges, regulatory, ASV, market charges, they're all regulated and they're all tied to the gigajoule. So the only way you reduce those is to reduce the gigajoules, generally. Some are actually fixed charges, so they're not controllable. Okay. Preparing for your bill, look for your energy supplies, things like energy invoice details. The most important page is the second page. It shows you all the details. So just knowing how much you paid and the gas on the front is not worth much to you. You're better off looking at the second page so you can drill in and you can do a bit of analysis. Make sure you do a very tight forecast. As I said before, you can get burnt something shocking if you over forecast. It's worth spending a lot of time on that. Work around flexibility. Can you do aggregation? Can you do all these clever things? Can the retailer offer you some value add to drive his offer compared to someone else's? And some of them can come up with some very good ideas. Then request a quotation. Don't go overboard with these things. You just get out there and you price it. You can give them the profiles. You can You tell them how much gas you used in the past and how much you're going to use in the future. They can turn that round very quickly. Some people go overboard preparing great big tender documents with value add and all sorts of things, which we used to do. End of the day, most customers will say, okay, what's the best price? I think a molecule of gas from George versus Fred's pretty much the same, so I'm going to drive the best price, factoring in all the other, flexibility or anything else that they would offer you. And lastly, understand all the contract terms. I know it's a pain, but as I say, there's a whole lot of little traps there. You really do need to read the detail so that you don't get caught out. Okay, now let's get back to gas supply. Look, in Victoria, gas meter infrastructure is quite relatively sophisticated. It's been around for a long time. Basically, the meter there is a fairly old one on the left, but that has what's called a double run regulator set. So what happens there is if the main leg where you build fails, the regulators, it can switch over to the other leg to continue production, to continue availability of gas for the plant. Most of these have a flow computer on these meters now. And what a flow computer does, it takes the pulse from the meter, I said it was cubic metres of gas. It measures the pressure and temperature of the gas. It all goes into a little computer and gives you corrected flow, accurate flow. That then is sent by a radio, solar-powered radio, to the control room, so that the market knows how much gas the larger customers are using. These flow computers are mainly on the major customers, not on smaller ones. The information from those meters can be quite valuable to customers in determining how they're using the gas. Okay, is it worth looking at how you're using gas, or power for that matter? I think it is, even if you don't put meters everywhere or do. You can get the data out of these smart devices that are storing it every half hour or every hour for gas, and you can plot it in Excel. Say that example there, the July profile, shows day on day 30-minute intervals. This is an electricity one, but the same thing applies for gas. What that shows is that on a cluster, a normal week, there's quite a variance in the amount of energy that's being used. You can see that there's quite a range, particularly in the afternoons there, around 28 there. It's when people are going home, but there's a hell of a lot of difference between the highest and the lowest for that month, yet the production's the same. So why? You ask people why. Did guys leave ovens going on one day? On last Wednesday, did they leave the ovens going and normally they switch them off? That sort of graph is fantastic. Really, you shouldn't be much difference one day to another. If it is, why? There might be a good reason, but at least ask the question. So what we encourage, instead of putting meters everywhere, you have this sort of profile available at the daily meeting or the weekly production meeting, and you throw that at guys, and the guys running production normally know. They'll say, oh, George, I had to run that, or, I don't know, we left some hoses running. Hot water hoses, so that might have used more gas. But it starts to get everyone thinking, what can we do to try and close those gaps so that we've minimised the wastage on some of those days? Not expensive to do and certainly worth the exercise. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that. Okay, what about overall monitoring and targeting with gas or power? You've got to establish a KPI using the metering that you've got available, the main meters or whatever. And what that is the energy used against the activity that you're doing. So if you're making widgets, it's megajoules of gas per widget that you make. There's a whole lot of variables that might impact that, but you know those. It might be weather, it might be production rates, all sorts of things. But at least capture that. The energy you use to make a useful activity. So that gives you an indication of how well you're using the energy that you're purchasing. So I guess the other thing you could look at is the co-benefits. Co-benefits are benefits that you get by improving the energy efficiency. You might have better product, you might have less waste, you might have all of those things by better control. So it's not only the energy savings, it could be some of the other co-benefits that come along for the ride. On this whole area, in Europe, a lot more people are using what's called the overall equipment effectiveness for energy. And what that basically says is, yeah, you can fix the steam traps and the insulations and all the things that we talked about before. But if you lose availability of a plant, say the oven breaks down, or the oven's not operating properly, or you're losing product because you're not running those things properly and it goes to waste, the formula is A times P times Q. Loss of availability of the plant, loss of performance of that piece of equipment, and loss of quality that you've got to rework. All of those things impact the specific energy because you're putting a whole lot of energy not to make a widget. So what I push very heavily now is that you look at specific energy, but you look at the overall equipment, the impact of energy efficiency on overall equipment performance. A lot of companies do overall equipment performance for production reasons, but they don't relate it back to specific energy. And you should, because you're already measuring it for production. It's easy to relate it back to megajoules per kilogram. Implant meters, look, gas meters and steam meters, water meters, you can put all of these in, but some people go overboard with this stuff. They'll go and put them everywhere. A sub-meter gas meter might cost you $5,000 or $6,000. A big steam meter, 10 grand. You put a meter in, it doesn't save you a brass razoo unless you use the information. So what I highly recommend is get what you've got, and try and make it work first. And then if you really do need a meter and it's key, then you go and spend the dough. But some people will rush out and put meters everywhere and then say, well, what am I going to do with this information? Cart before the horse. Nothing wrong with plant meters if you need them. For example, the one I spoke to you before with the kiln in the other session, critical on a kiln because it's so energy intensive and so critical to the business. If you've got another process where you've got a dirty big oven there that uses all the energy and you've got a little boiler there that uses 5%, well, you spend almost as much money on the meter for that as the meter for that, so spend your money on that one. Portable instruments, look, there's a whole lot of instruments that can be used, all very low cost. Combustion testers are about $800, not a lot of money. Thermocouples, $50 for thermocouple. So all of these things, you can set yourself up with a good little energy portable kit for a factory, $3,000, $3,500. When you consider what people are paying for gas in factories, having that instrumentation available is a pretty good investment. Okay, now we've done all that, we've tuned our furnaces and we've put insulation on and we've looked at our gas bills, it's still too bloody high. What are we going to do? The alternatives. I'll briefly talk about some of these alternatives and where they sort of currently sit on the market. First of all, solar hot water. Solar hot water, there's certainly in places like swimming pools, low temperature solar hot water is widely used and very practical, where you're preheating the water for the pools and those sorts of things. You can get the new evacuated tube type that are very efficient, that can give you very high quality water that can really reduce the gas dramatically. And really that sits well in that level. When you're trying to heat water in factories and things, you need a very large amount of direct solar heating. And the cost is quite dramatic. So it's sort of 8 years to 9 year paybacks. So it's still too long for most people to sort of absorb. When I say it's 8 years, that doesn't include, any subsidies and other grants that you can get. So you can drag it back a little bit, but it's still a fairly long payback and not a large number compared to the amount of energy you're using from the steam. So it's happening, but fairly slowly, except in those low temperature applications, like commercial or swimming pools where it's quite well accepted. Biogas utilisation. This is where you're using, you're making biogas, you're treating a waste product, producing biogas, and then you're using the biogas instead of natural gas. There are quite a few applications of that. The tips, for example, they use gas to drive engines. There's some food factories actually recover the biogas from their waste treatment processes and put it in the boilers to replace or supplement the natural gas. I guess my only comment with this is that if the biogas or waste treatment process is required and you've got a flare, in other words, you've got a digester and you're making biogas and flaring it, then it's very much a good business case to, instead of flaring the gas, putting it into for good use. But you don't want the tail wagging the dog where you put a digester plant in just to make biogas, because the capital is huge. So if you've got the gas available because there is a requirement to have a digester, then that often stacks up. Spending the huge capital to digest when you don't need to make biogas, doesn't stack up at the moment. Biomass is another area of interest. There are some industries that are moving to solid fuels. Like, for example, the timber mills and these sorts of places where they have a lot of waste wood from their processes. They will burn wood to make steam, or the waste wood, basically to dispose of that wood. So that works well. In Victoria, there's huge amounts of biomass, from crops and things. The challenge is to actually capture that, process it, put it into a fuel and distribute it to the end-use customer. In the case of steam in Victoria, all the boilers are little packaged gas boilers like we've seen. To go to a solid fuel, you basically have to throw your boiler plant out and build a special new plant. Again, a capital restriction. Having said that, there's still quite a few people moving down that track. And if gas continues to go up and up and up, there'll be more inventive uses of biomass. I suppose a good example of this at the moment is the plant at Maryvale. People have heard about that, is where a huge plant that's being planned there to take a lot of municipal waste from Melbourne, to burn that, to replace the large amount of gas being used to generate power at the Maryvale plant. So that's a huge example of how you can recover various types of biomass or biosolids to generate, to replace natural gas. So really, the main thing is availability and logistics around getting it to the end user. The other thing is the environmental controls around these fuels. Obviously, things like the waste that needs EPA approvals, and there's quite a lot involved in actually firing some of these waste fuels. It's done in other parts of the world, and it really just comes back to economics and logistics. A good example of this is the Nescafe plant at Gympie. You can see that plant there. That's using coffee grounds from the process. Fire the coffee grounds to make steam instead of using natural gas or other solid fuels. It's a good plant, but you're talking, that's a 16 megawatt boiler. That's probably, the footprint of that boiler would be about 5 times that of a 16 megawatt natural gas boiler. So the capex would have been huge. Now, I think they got a lot of funding to assist there. So in a plant like that, where you can't practically get pipes, lines out there, and it costs you a fortune and everything else, that sort of thing, alternative fuels, wood waste fuels and things tend to stack up. Some of the other generation, look, traditionally people have taken solid fuels and turned them into steam to generate electricity. The top one there is a plant in Queensland that's using traditional technology. The one at the bottom is an organic Rankine cycle that basically uses low temperature processes to generate electricity. High temperature heat pumps, these are where you're using refrigeration plant to generate hot water. Okay, these technologies can typically make 90 degrees C water, and they work. Lastly, PV cells and hot water hybrids. This is where you're using photovoltaic cells in conjunction with hot water storage. So you're using PV cells to replace natural gas because you're making electricity and using it in a hot water tank. And lastly, ARENA is the federal government's Renewable Energy Association. They produced a very good report a few years ago, and it's all around replacing natural gas, applications for replacing natural gas. I'd highly recommend that report because basically it goes through all the technologies that can be replaced. It's available on the web, and we'd recommend that as not a bad reference document if you are considering renewable energy. So that's it. Thank you. Sustainability Victoria supports business to take action on climate change and reduce energy costs. If you'd like to find out more about Sustainability Victoria's services, please visit them on their website.